which will focus on victims. These meetings are held regularly to enable me to track the progress being made against the key priorities in my police, crime and justice plan. They also help me promote openness and transparency in my work and ensure that the Chief Constable and senior officers are held to account to the public for their performance and actions. Public accountability meetings are really important to me as they provide residents with an ideal opportunity to ask their personal questions. Not surprisingly, given the subject we are discussing today, I've received a really good selection of questions, and these will be answered directly by the Chief Constable and her senior colleagues. Since 2021, when I was first elected as PCC, victims of crime have remained firmly at the centre of everything that I do. I know from the many victims I've spoken to over the years that recovering from trauma of crime can be a long and extremely painful journey. Some don't fully recover from their experiences, and almost all carry the burden for a long time. So it's our duty as professionals, as organisations and as people to make the road to healing and recovery as smooth and as supportive as possible. And there are really good reasons for this. Victims who receive appropriate support may be less vulnerable to victimisation and less likely to suffer ongoing trauma. Not only is this beneficial to their well-being, but it also reduces the future demands on other public services such as health and social care. I've always maintained that there's only one truly effective approach for delivering good victim care, and this has seen our justice system through the eyes of the victims themselves. I strongly believe victims of crime must always be allowed to tell their story. This is why any changes we've made over the years have always emerged from the voices of victims themselves. We have gone to great lengths to secure genuine testimonies from victims, including those who have experienced sexual abuse and violence, to understand what it's like to step into their shoes and face the barriers to support or justice. We continue to involve them at every opportunity so that we can listen and learn from their experiences to make the positive impact all victims of crime deserve. My ambition is that victims will no longer be treated as helpless bystanders in the criminal justice system. Instead, they will be empowered to take a principal role in their own journey and along the way improve the rights and experiences of other victims like themselves in the future. My Victims Champions Policy and Commissioning team and in-house victim care and advice service have been amassing lived experiences of our criminal justice system for some time now. These experiences have already influenced key commissioning decisions and continue to determine my priorities. I recently published my second Police and Crime and Justice Plan, and I can tell you that improving the experience of victims is the golden thread running throughout that document. It's paramount to me that we implement changes that ensure victims remain the priority and not an afterthought. This means developing better support mechanisms to enhance recovery and prevent re-victimisation, amplifying the victim's voice so we can continually improve and learn the lessons, and addressing the many barriers that prevent timely justice and prolong the trauma. It also means that embedding a prevention-first approach, preventing crime before it happens, is not only a more cost-effective option, but also protects people from experiencing unnecessary trauma as victims and reduces demand on all areas of the criminal justice system. The Chief Constable and I are committed to developing a first-class victim service at the first point of contact with the police through the whole criminal justice system, with appropriate support provided throughout the process. Within my new plan, I've set out an extensive set of commitments to deliver a first-class victim service. These cover all aspects of the victim's experience, from recovery support, victim contact, securing the victim's voice, ensuring compliance with the Victims Code, and restorative justice and victim satisfaction. Each pledge is crucial to building confidence and trust in our criminal justice system. Currently, 27% of police investigations are closed because the victim does not support police action. We must get it right from the very beginning. The Chief Constable and I will develop a first-class victim service from the first point of contact with the police throughout the criminal justice system. And I'm proud to say that Durham is already recognised nationally as an innovator of victim care. The decision to bring our victim care and advice service under the management of my office really was a catalyst for change, and I now have better oversight of the services provided to victims of crime and can promote closer working relationships between partners and Durham Constabulary. Last summer, VCAS achieved the Victims' Choice Quality Mark in recognition of their outstanding performance in meeting the needs of victims of crime across County Durham and Darlington. As you know, this is the highest measure of standards possible for a service like VCAS. But I only need to look at some of the comments from victims this year who have been helped by the service to understand how valued and life-changing the work they do is. And for me, this is probably the most important yardstick of success. When I took the VCAS under my wing 2 years ago, I was adamant I could make the recovery journey better for people impacted by crime. I take my role as the Victims Commissioner very seriously, and I feel strongly that the needs of victims should always lie at the heart of the criminal justice system. I'm grateful to the whole team, not only for buying into this vision, but for living and breathing it so we really can make a difference. The relationships they have built with our partners, the specialist skills they've acquired, and the enhanced systems they have developed for sharing information and reducing risk has really put Durham on the map nationally for innovation, and most importantly, is ensuring that no victim is left behind. I'm proud of everything that they have achieved and look forward to pushing further boundaries together. All of my public accountability meetings have been recorded and are available on YouTube for public viewing, and a link can be found on my office's website. A full recording of this meeting will be available shortly to enable residents to see exactly how the accountability process works. Before we start, can we please have some brief introductions from the executive team? And for this morning's session, I'm going to invite Rachel, Chief Constable Rachel Bacon, to say a few words and provide some operational context and information before introducing her team.
Good morning, Joy. I'm Rachel Bacon, the Chief Constable, and with me today I've got
Temporary Detective Superintendent Peter Carr, who's the Victims and Witnesses Lead for Durham.
Head of Command Sheena Irwin for Governance and Insights Force.
Kieran Irvin, Deputy Chief Constable. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, John McAdam, Assistant Chief Constable.
And thank you to those out there who are joining us today. I am very grateful to be given this opportunity to discuss how the force responds to victims of crime within County Durham and Darlington. It takes tremendous courage for victims of crime to come forward and report to the police. Therefore, an effective response goes well beyond the prevention and investigation of criminal offences. Victims of crime are brave and resilient. They put their trust in us to listen and respond to their needs, and they should be confident that we will do everything we can to bring offenders to justice. This approach goes hand in hand with how we instill trust and confidence overall within our communities and at the heart of everything we do. Of course, I want to prevent any person from becoming a victim. However, the reality is that we know crime will continue to exist, so we need to continue working together and looking for opportunities to improve our services to victims. Shortly, we will hear from Detective Superintendent Peter Carr, who will discuss the work that has gone before, but perhaps more crucially, the work that is ongoing within the force and with key partner agencies to ensure victims of crime get the service they truly deserve. Our commitment to victims of crime underlines the values of compassion, integrity and professionalism. We recognise that victims of crime each have their own story to tell, and we must listen and act upon their experiences. We are, of course, bound by the Victims' Code. However, this is not just about adhering to law. This is about understanding and being sensitive to the experiences victims have endured. The force has recently implemented processes aimed at improving our services to victims. This includes providing specialist training to our staff and officers so they understand what is expected of them, and helps us to provide the necessary support to victims. We recognise the importance of being open and honest at all stages of the criminal justice system. Therefore, we have invested in digital capability to improve our engagement with victims to help them stay better informed at every stage. The Victims' Code was introduced for a reason, as we have at times let our victims down. But I will continue to do everything I can to ensure our victims get the right support and the outcomes they deserve. Thank you for your time today, and I will now hand over to Peter Carr, who is the force lead for our response to victims of crime. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, so this presentation will feature Durham's journey, basically, in terms of victims, how we're supporting victims within the service, and basically the presentation will map through the victims' journey and what they can expect from Durham Police as we move forward. So I think the first thing to start with is it's clear in the Chief Constable's delivery plan for 2024 to 2027 the importance that victims have. So we put them right in front and centre of that delivery plan, and we talk about providing them with a first-class service. We also discuss in force about how we might achieve that first-class service, and that basically requires continued improvement from all aspects of the organisation. In terms of the organisation, how we supply first-class service to victim requires that all areas of the business are operating effectively. Everything we should do within the force and within policing should have victims at our centre. We're a public service. We're there to basically assist the public and provide that first-class service. What we want in Durham Police is we want victims to be confident to contact us, that we know that they'll get a good service from us, that we'll do an excellent job. And unfortunately, if they're subject to a second crime or re-victimisation, that they've got the confidence to contact us back because we did a good job in the first place. The other area that the Chief Constable's delivery plan identifies in terms of victims is those people that are most vulnerable in our community and what we do to help those people most vulnerable. I think policing's come on a long way in the last 10 years in recognising vulnerability, and I'll go through that during the course of the presentation. The other area that we must achieve is feedback. So we've spoken, and the PCC spoken, and so has the Chief Constable in their introduction, about how we learn basically from victims and how we place them at the centre of investigations. To kind of identify the presentation will run through the victim's journey from start to finish, and what support can be provided and what we're doing in Durham Police. So the first point at which the victim's journey really starts is that initial call for service, which normally comes into the force control room. Durham Police receive thousands of calls a month, hundreds of calls a day into the force control room. And that's not only the mechanism that we receive calls into the police, through other areas such as local meetings, through social services referrals, and other areas of the business. Plus, we get a lot of intelligence provided by members of the public highlighting crime and people being subject to victimisation. Therefore, the force need to balance its resources against the demand that comes in through those initial calls. Therefore, it's important that police triage calls to identify which crimes police officers need to attend, and this is done by assessing threat, risk and harm. This allows they're dealing with the victims who have the greatest need, those that are most vulnerable, and that we get out to them to provide them the first class service. Those that need our help immediately, we respond to those. One thing's important to stress is that despite responding to calls in different ways, all calls that we receive from victims are really important to us and should all be treated the same. Obviously, our response to the public after that initial threat, risk and harm's identified, we consider how that might look. So on occasions, it'll be appropriate for us to do an emergency response. That's where people are in danger. We need to get to see them quickly. There might be immediate, where we go in a certain time frame because we think it's important to get to that victim because they need us. And then there might be other occasions where actually it's more appropriate for all involved, including the victim, that we might make a diary appointment or we might deal with them through a different means. Where the ongoing threat towards a victim is being identified to be low, it might be that we might make an appointment or provide an appointment for a virtual investigation team to pick that up. So that's where basically somebody within the control room, who a police officer might speak to somebody over the phone and do those initial calls. Based on that, it might not be required for a police officer to attend, and we might be able to do, we might be more efficient basically dealing with those queries over the phone. Obviously, that initial first contact that police have with our control room and have with our staff is vitally important. That first impression that a victim gets about how we triage, how we manage their call, how we respond to them is vitally important. And our control room staff are skilled in basically identifying and interacting with the public. They undergo regular CPD to ensure they act appropriately and basically that they put safeguarding victims at the centre of what they do. So when a crime's reported to police, an investigation is required to understand what's happened, gather evidence, bring those people responsible for breaking the law to justice. So normally when the police are contacted, it results in a crime being recorded. Durham Police deal with approximately 65,000 crimes per year. About 55,000 of those have a victim at the centre of them. So it's important that we deal with them appropriately. When a crime is reported, the first job of the police is to ensure that the victim is safe. So our first job prior to doing any investigation is to respond and make sure that that person feels safe. If they're in danger, that we remove them from danger. And if somebody's causing the public danger, we remove them. Once we've ensured that a victim is safe, this is when we begin evidence recovery. And this is the primary investigation stage. We often need evidence from victims to assist us in this. We understand that that can be difficult for them at times and challenging, but where possible, we must get that evidence. And this is where communication and effective communication come in. Victims have identified to us through their feedback that they feel most safe and most involved when they basically listen to, when we communicate effectively with them, when we update them about what's happening and why we're doing certain things. We also need to consider persons who've broken the law at this stage. So victims feel safeguarding when we take immediate action. So arresting people early can be a way of safeguarding victims and making sure that they feel safe. Whilst policing has national standards of guidance about how investigations should be undertaken, Durham Police have adopted the investigational framework called Operation Crystal. So as I said, Operation Crystal is Durham Police's bespoke framework, and it focuses on investigating crime, providing that first-class victim service, basically through crime investigation, with continuous improvement to raise investigational standards. So as I spoke about, we've got two stages to an investigation, the primary investigation stage and the secondary investigation stage. So that primary investigation stage is that initial police response, how we deal effectively with a member of the public, how we deal with that victim how we safeguard them at that initial stage, and how we get them that required support they might need immediately. Into the secondary investigation stage, this is where communication is essential. Operation Crystal provides officers with guidance and direction about lines of inquiry that might be pursued. Should allow them to successfully investigate the crime to a successful conclusion. We highlight it as the Crystal standard basically in Durham Police. It's basically the benchmark of excellence basically in investigations. What we find is that we successfully investigate the crime, that we engage successfully with the victim. If we see it through to a successful conclusion, victims tend to be satisfied and get some recognition from it at the end. To ensure high standards of investigations, the force continually looks to improve its quality of investigations, how it records crime, and how we support victims through the criminal justice process. Operation Crystal not only gives a framework, but it provides clarity to officers and staff as to the standards required to investigate crime, how we record it, what makes excellent victim care, and introduces the standards formatting of these records and supports the delivery of these expectations through training, performance management, and our governance framework. It provides knowledge and certainty that allowed investigation to be built to a Crystal standard. Nationally, Operation Crystal has received praise for the work it does to ensure that investigations are conducted to a high standard. As I said, Operation Crystal is a continual programme for improvement, so we're constantly improving. We use crime reviews or scrutiny panels to basically recognise good and bad practice with regards to investigations, and the idea is to improve investigational standards and through which deliver a better service to victims. Crime scrutiny panels not only look at investigations, but they look at how we interact with victims, not only at the beginning of an investigation or that first control room response, but also how they've been interacted out throughout the whole course of the investigation. And I'll come on to victim needs assessment later. Operation Crystal focuses across all crime types. So it looks at neighbourhood crime, which is your antisocial behaviour, locality-based offending like theft and burglary, to nationally recognised issues such as violence against women and girls, domestic abuse, and those rape and serious sexual offences. One thing that I spoke about earlier is basically victims feel empowered when they're communicated with effectively during the course of an investigation, and we highlight to officers the need to keep victims up to date at all stages. Durham have introduced the My Durham portal, which is an app that victims can sign up to allow them to have clear lines of communication and provided updates about what is happening with their crime directly from officers. They can either do this through text messaging service or through email. This gives victims the ability to communicate directly and effectively with officers and ask them for timely updates to make sure that they're up to date with what's happening with their crime. This should be offered to all victims and is offered at the first point of contact with a victim. At present, this is only available to a few crime types within Durham. Whilst we launched the scheme, it's available for criminal damage, assault, theft, robbery, burglary dwelling, and some public order offences. However, as part of Durham's improvement, we've recognised the importance to expand the portal, and we're looking at all crime types to be expanded across it. We found that victims have taken up the services, they've seen great benefit of it, and have been able to interact with officers and be provided up-to-date information about what's happening with their crime. It's fully safe. It has two-stage authentication, so it requires the victim to add passwords and be sent text messages to confirm that it's them, so safety is not an issue. It's also a repository for information as well, so we talked about the victim codes of practice before. The portal has the ability to provide guidance to victims basically about their rights under the victim's codes of practice. As I said, we're trying to improve the service and it has a feedback function as well. where at the end of an investigation, it encourages victims to provide their feedback, not only about that service, but about how the police responded as well. So initially, when investigating, I spoke briefly about the main thing to start with in an investigation is that the victim feels safe, that we've done everything we can to make sure that that victim feels safe, and they feel that they can progress and move forward. Once that's been done, sometimes we'll ask victims to provide evidence. We appreciate how traumatic this can be. It can be disturbing for a witness or a victim to provide that evidence. And we've got to do everything we can as the police to support victims in providing that information, allowing their voice to be heard, allowing that information to be provided, and support them through that measure. So how evidence is gained from a victim is a discussion between the officer and the victim. We are governed by certain ways that we have to provide evidence to the court, and that might be through the form of a statement, which is written down, and it might also be through a video recorded interview if we feel that's the case, where we may interview a victim to obtain that information. On occasions that can be played at court, which can be easy for the victim in terms of that. We must ensure that we support victims during the evidential stage. So we've got specialist units set up to assist victims in providing their evidence. We have specialist suites which make victims feel comfortable when they provide that evidence, and ensure that they can give the best evidence they possibly can. Officers undergo specialist training to make sure that they're in tune with victims' needs, that they're patient, that they listen, that they're engaging, and that they support a victim to gain the best possible evidence they can from them. It's an opportunity for a victim to tell their story. It's their first opportunity to provide information which may end up at court. We have an excellent relationship with support services who assist us with this process, and we'll come on to them in a little bit more detail. Officers understand how traumatic these incidents can be for victims, and they understand the support that's required to make sure that victims feel safe to provide that evidence. The best evidence we get means that we're able to take more people to court and prosecute those people responsible. However, victims need to feel confident in providing that evidence to us. So I spoke a little bit about specialist services to support victims, and the PCC and the Chief Constable have spoken about the Victim Care and Advice Service, so VCAS, who provides support to victims of crime. They support them through the Criminal Justice Service. Referrals are made by police, by other areas, and they're an invaluable source. VCAS provide a really good support service to victims of crime. We offer their service at every opportunity we possibly can. We invite VCAS in internal meetings within the police. We encourage officers basically to have an excellent relationship with advocates of VCAS and encourage that they use their support at every turn. One of the basic rights under the Victims' Codes of Practice is that these services will be available. So it's not in terms of police, we may, it's a we must, and we must provide that basic right. The service works due to increased waiting lists in court. What we've identified is that there's obviously increased waiting lists at court. And what data shows is that victims who receive the support of VCAS are more entitled to continue through the court process. We appreciate that it's really problematic and difficult at the moment. Those queues at court delaying things makes it more problematic and difficult for victims. We are doing all we can, but obviously that VCAS support can assist massively. Not only do we have VCAS to support, we have other specialist support agencies such as Harbour in terms of domestic abuse. We have independent sexual violence advisors, and we have the Sexual Assault Referral Centre known as the SARC, which are great sources of help. As I said, police have excellent relationships with these. and encourage all victims to gain the necessary support. The other side of it is we sometimes understand that victims might not want to engage with the police at the first turn. They might be subject to crime, they might be subject to some really serious offences, but don't feel that they've got the confidence to report. And we need to understand this. This is where our support services come in to help. They can be contacted independently of the police, and what we would encourage victims to do is, if you don't feel that confidence to contact the police at this moment in time, we encourage them to seek that support from our partner agencies. As I said, support services are involved in internal Durham police meetings. We monitor data to identify that these referrals have been made and that we're increasing the referrals. And we engage in meetings held with the PCC's office and other partners to make sure that we're doing all we can to refer people into victim support services. One thing to mention is that support service will remain with the victim for as long as they want it. We've spoke about their journey to recovery. At some point, there is a natural end where there will be an exit from victim support services, and we allow a victim to continue with their life. However, this will be an agreed point with the victim, and we'll continue to support them throughout. We've mentioned Operation Crystal a few times. It's underpinned by a focus on victim engagement and support during investigation. And we talk about a victim needs assessment. So at the beginning of the investigation, officers will complete a victim needs assessment to fully understand what support a victim may need during the course of that investigation. This is probably an area that police need to continue to improve in. Our victim needs assessments are mandatory. So when creating a crime, Durham Police have the technology to ensure that a victim needs assessment is completed 100% of the time with a victim. The victim's needs assessment is the opportunity for an officer at the beginning of an investigation, in conjunction with the victim, to identify the best way that they can be supported. The initial assessment should focus on how the crimes affected the victim, include emotionally, financially, physically. What support does the victim need, not only from the police, but from our partners? And what can we do as the police to facilitate this help? How can we best support the victim in feeling safe? The victim needs assessment is a time that a contract of communication is drawn up between the officer in the case and the victim. And this is really, really important. Again, the use of My Durham portal to aid that two-way communication is essential moving forward. The victim needs assessment isn't a one-off, so we don't just do it at the beginning of the investigation. We should do it throughout the whole course of the investigation, and it should be constantly under review by an OIC, an officer in the case. It should be tailored to meet the needs of each individual victim. We need to understand that each victim is different, their needs will completely different, and we need to make sure that they're bespoke to the needs of that individual victim. We ask supervisors to make sure that they monitor and performance manage victim needs assessment. Are they being changed and tailored to meet the needs of each victim? It's been mentioned a few times about the victims' codes of practice. These are the rights under the Victims and Prisoners Bill. These are the things that the police might not do. They're the things the police should do. And there's 12 basic rights which are on the screen. And number one is respect for victims, saying that we should treat them with respect and dignity throughout the course of criminal justice system process. This is one of the main factors that we must consider when conducting an investigation and taking a victim through the journey in the criminal justice process. Their dignity, their respect, and make sure they feel supported. This should be the basis of anything that we do. There's a number of victims' rights, 12 basic ones, but I picked out a couple which are important. and have been mentioned, and also because there might be ones that members of the public might not necessarily know about. So restorative justice process. So this is a scheme whereby victims can be part of an offender's rehabilitation, or an opportunity for them to voice their opinions to a suspect or an offender. This can include writing a letter to the suspect or speaking to the offender face to face, depending on how everyone feels. It's an opportunity for victims to sometimes gain closure. The second one's access to feedback. It's a mandatory right that victims should provide feedback to us, to provide us with an opportunity to improve our service. And we encourage that everybody should take up this right to provide us feedback. By being provided insight into victims' journeys, and obviously obtaining their lived experience through the criminal justice service, we can learn from that and we can get better at what we do as an organisation and as a team. In force, we monitor our performance against the victims' codes of practice. And not only do we monitor it in force, we look at it in the national meeting, and we also looking at it at a regional forces meeting as well. And we discuss collectively as forces about how we can improve our performance in terms of this area. The final point on the slide is about attending court. Now, this can be difficult for victims, and we understand that this can sometimes feel daunting for them. Nationally, I've spoke about there is an acknowledgement that the court waiting times are too long, and we're doing everything we can nationally with ourselves, the court services, CPS, and everybody to cut that waiting list down. Obviously, waiting lists and waiting to go to court can be really daunting for victims, and we need to make sure that they feel supported. In Durham Police, we've got a witness care team, and they take up that victim support care once a case is brought to court. They will update the victim about what is happening with their case, the logistics about attending court, and they'll reassure victims attending court and can provide pre-visit to court to help show the victim around, to make sure that they know what to expect when they attend court, which is really important. They can provide them support on the day, sit them in an area of the courtroom which makes them feel comfortable and gives them the opportunity to provide the best evidence they possibly can. What I would say is, despite the involvement of witness care, the officer in the case, or the police officer who's got responsibility for that investigation, will continue to support victims right up to the point at which the court case is concluded. Given their evidence at court, we have something called special measures, which is basically brought in to ensure that victims are provided their voice so they can give the best possible evidence they possibly can. And what I would encourage victims to do is have those conversations with police officers, and encourage police officers to have those conversations with them about what special measures can be provided to make sure that victims can give their best evidence at court. So I spoke at slide 1 about vulnerability and the recognition of vulnerability. One of the biggest changes in police now, I would say, over the last 10 years is the police's ability to identify vulnerability. We are improving on identifying it all the time. We now recognise that given certain situations that anybody in our community can be vulnerable. As stated by the Chief Constable's delivery plan, one of Durham Police's main priorities is to protect those people that are most vulnerable in our community. The police should be doing this as a matter of course. Unfortunately, vulnerable people can often be susceptible to being repeat victims and being subject to repeat victimisation. And as the police, we need to ensure that this doesn't happen through both an enforcement point of view and a preventative approach. Internally within the force, we map repeat victims. Where possible, we provide them with additional measures to avoid this happening again. We support them. We work with our partners really closely in these meetings, including social care, housing providers, education and health, to make sure that they get the appropriate support. The police aren't always the best people to provide that support, and sometimes we need the assistance of our partners through right care, right person. Neighbourhood police teams are essential in assisting victims and dealing with them effectively, and vulnerable victims, and supporting them through this multi-agency approach. One area of significant vulnerability are those involved in domestic abuse relationships. These can often be complex to deal with. Often victims need our help, but subject to control measures, don't cry out for this help, and it restricts them from asking for help. We need to do everything we can to make sure that we put victims in the position that they can contact us. Often we find that domestic abuse victims are reluctant to provide evidence, probably through fear, through coercive control, through other partners. About 23% of the crime reported at Durham often relates to domestic abuse, so it's a high volume. We have to do everything we can to tackle this. One thing I'd say is that we don't often need the support of the victim to make sure that we prosecute somebody for an offence. Yes, it helps if the victim provides it, but under Operational Crystal, we're rolling out training officers to make them aware of the importance of gaining early capture of domestic abuse evidence. From their attendance as a scene with body-worn footage, initial accounts obtained, witness support, this can lead to police running evidence-led prosecutions where victims don't need to provide that information at court. Often though, sadly, we aren't able to prosecute people at court in terms of a domestic violence setting without the support of the victim. But what we do have is, where the threshold for charge isn't met, we can use civil orders. And we have domestic violence prevention notices, which are issued by the police, and then later go into court, getting domestic violence prevention orders, which are then used to allow the police to control more effectively offenders. They will allow us to control the movements of offenders and ensure that they can't have contact with victims, providing them the necessary space where they may be able to rebuild their lives, or actually come forward and provide us that evidence that we need to take somebody to court. Where we obtain these orders, we robustly monitor offenders to ensure that they're abiding by them. We do that through our morning process, on a morning, discussing, talking about them. We have other orders as well, such as stalking prevention orders, which are now in place, which are used to manage those people where they might be causing people harassment, alarm and distress. The use of civil orders by Durham Police has been massively invested in, and we're doing all we can to ensure that we're using these orders. We have teams assigned to help and change and record the metrics around this about us obtaining civil orders. We monitor civil orders through in-house meetings to ensure that we're using them effectively, to ensure that victims feel safe. We also have opportunities like Clare's Law scheme, which for those of you who don't know is where people can be notified who started a relationship with someone about that person's previous convictions for domestic abuse. This allows people to make informed decisions about their relationship with that person. Again, we monitor this on a daily basis. And one thing I'd say is that we're not only using civil orders for domestic related incidents, but we're using them to try and tackle organised crime, repeat violent offenders, and those who behave in concerning ways through sexual offences or harassment. Operation Trinity was a force-wide operation launched to ensure we track both repeat victims and repeat offenders in local and force-wide meetings. Operation Trinity is a force-wide initiative which was launched in January last year and has transformed the way officers manage sex offenders, helping to further protect vulnerable people from harm. Obtaining sexual risk orders and sexual harm prevention orders to run alongside criminal investigations to again help us manage sex offenders and assist those most vulnerable in our community. One thing to mention when we're talking about victims is Operation Soteria, which is basically the police and CPS's response in 2021 to poor outcomes for victims, lack of prosecutions for really serious offences such as rape and serious sexual offences. Operation Soteria is a national drive, and basically it's been implemented across all forces, and it used academic studies basically to highlight and improve our performance around this. So in terms of Soteria, it was brought about because victims felt that they were the ones under scrutiny when they were reporting rape offences. They felt that it was actually them who was on trial as opposed to the offender, and actually our response to it was pretty poor as an organisation right across the board. In policing and CBS, there was low rates of prosecution for rape offences, and something needed to be done. Soteria has obviously been brought about. It's now victim-centric, so we put the victim at the heart of what we do in terms of rape investigations and serious sexual offences. We use context-led investigations, so we understand the context of what's happening in terms of it. And Durham Police were a pathfinder, basically a pathfinder force when Operation Soteria was initially launched. And so it's well embedded into the organisation. What have we done? So we've enhanced specialist officers and learning and development, so they understand how to deal with rape and serious sexual offences, complaints, using academic studies and various disciplines. They've introduced a national operating model which sits within the force. We have an app, and the national operating model is seen as good practice about how you investigate such offences and how you work through it. This has been rolled out across the force, and significantly all staff have been upskilled in the use of the national operating model when it comes to rape and serious sexual offences. It is expected by the end of the year that all officers within Durham will have been trained around the Operation Soteria national operating model. This is way ahead of most forces. The Durham difference has seen us learn and continue to learn through lived experiences of victims. This learning has been embedded into our training team, and through Operation Crystal has been rolled out across the force. We're working closely with CPS to discuss specifically rape and serious sexual offences cases, discuss outcomes, we discuss investigations which were not successful. We look at why that was the case and what opportunities may have been missed, or what could we have done better. We also engage with CPS now early in rape and serious sexual offences cases. We ask their advice at an early stage rather than towards the back end of an investigation, and almost conduct a joint investigation with the CPS to ensure a successful outcome. The figures for Durham Police in terms of rape and their detection is one of the highest in the country, if not the highest. And it shows that by adopting the Operation Soteria national operating model and being a pathfinder force, we've been able to raise those investigational standards to ensure that if you are subject to offences of this nature, that there's a good opportunity that will prosecute an offender. One thing that must be mentioned is where we're unsuccessful in being able to support or take prosecution to court, the victims are updated and the exact reasons are given. And what we encourage is, or what happens is, that victims are spoken to by the ultimate decision maker. So if we're not able to prosecute an offender or take it any further, so we don't take it to CPS for final advice, the officer and the person who's made that decision will go and discuss it with the victim and give them clear rationale and their opinions as to why we weren't able to prosecute on this occasion. During that meeting, happened a letter as well, so they can understand it more. And also they're giving advice around the victim's right to review process. This is the opportunity where a victim can have their investigation independently reviewed. Durham Police has seen an increase in the victim's right to review. We encourage people to take up this option if they feel it's appropriate. Where police have referred a case to the CTS, and the CTS have come back to say that they don't think the threshold's been met to take it to court, then the CTS also have a victim's right to review process. And again, we'd encourage that victims take up that if they so need. These reviews are undertaken independently of the original investigation, so they obviously get that level of scrutiny to make sure that that investigation's been done and it gets a second look at. So in terms of, we're doing a lot in terms of Durham Police and our victim support, but as normal, we need to strive to improve. So we need to continue that continuous improvement. So while we're doing a lot, we need to continue the improvement across the organisation. We have internal force meetings are held to discuss how we can improve services to victims. We speak to the PCC's office on a regular basis to make sure that we're doing all that we can. We engage our support services in those meetings. We look at lived experience from victims to make sure that we do everything we possibly can to support victims through the criminal justice service, and where needed, tailor and improve our service that we provide. One area that's important is communication, and communication with victims to ensure that they feel empowered to basically be part of the journey through the criminal justice system. We need to work on this. We're not always the best at doing it, and we need to improve our service by communicating effectively, updating victims, making sure that they feel empowered to contact us. We spoke about lived experience. Obviously, getting those real life lived experiences from victims is invaluable. We found that through Operation Soteria and the feedback that we provided there. And then as Durham Police, we need to improve our training. So we continue to improve our engagement with victim services and training to ensure that all officers feel equipped to deal with victims, that they understand the importance, and that they provide that first class level of service to all that we come across. Thank you.
Thank you, Detective Superintendent Carr, for a very thoughtful and very insightful and very detailed presentation. When you were going through it, I just thought this recording, you know, I appreciate the time and effort of everybody here today and pulling this together. But I also think it's going to be a really valuable resource for both the force, my officers and partners to signpost victims to help them understand our approach, and also to help manage the victim's journey and highlight our determination and commitment to delivering a first-class victim service. There was an awful lot of information in there, and I think, as we've said, with victims, sometimes it's when people come to it, it might not be the first day, might not be the first week or the first month, but having this resource available to show the real comprehensive service that's offered and how dedicated we are is going to be really, really helpful. So I'm sure I'll pick up with Rachel at our next meeting about how we can utilise this really valuable resource and the detail that you've put in there. And now I would like just to move on to ask a number of questions. Really important that these questions have actually come from the public, and they will look like the answers to them. So this has been, I'm phrasing it in the way that they've been asked. So it'll be over to you to come back and answer the questions as you can. So my first question, or the first public question, is: if I can order a pizza and have it delivered within an hour, why do I have to wait 7 days for a police response? And then, given that the numbers of crimes and victims, how is this police response prioritised? So it's 2 questions, but can you give the response, please?
Commissioner, it's Kieran. It's Kieran here. I'll answer that first set of questions, if I may.
Thanks, Kieran.
I think that the first thing to sort of say in relation to the pizza delivery comparison, it's not a realistic or fair comparison between the simple service of a delivery function for fast food, which is a very limited scale service, and the overall complexity of policing. Of course, we want to respond straight away to everyone who calls us, but with the demands placed upon the service, that's simply not possible. You know, the response to calls and that initial scene attendance or virtual attendance through the telephone investigation function we have is one of a number of roles that the police service undertakes. That expands across investigations, broader victim care, specialist safeguarding, and then our wider prevention and control duties. So as a force, we do everything we can to balance service delivery by having the right resource on duty at the right time to deal with the demands we face, but sometimes that doesn't always work out. Now, despite the fact that we offer a range of digital routes to access the service, the majority of contact comes in through the force control room, either through 1999 or 101. And everybody who makes those calls is spoken directly, speaks to somebody directly in the control room, and we take initial incident detail and then make some decisions about how best we can deal with that case. As Peter's already mentioned, we use the Thrive approach, considering threat, harm and risk, but that also considers investigative opportunities, the V is for vulnerability, and then also engagement approaches that we can have. In our instance, in our circumstances, we're often responding to incidents where the initial caller is no longer there. And it's important that we can do things, as Peter's described, to fit around the work, the care and responsibilities and other commitments of the victims, because the service we deliver has to have some level of convenience for them. Now, of course, that's not the case when someone orders a pizza for delivery at a specific time, to a specific location and somewhere where they're going to be, because they've rung up to say that they want the pizza delivered to them. Equally, the service interaction for pizza delivery is simple, it's defined, and it's almost, you could describe it to the second of how long it might take. And after that, there's no further interaction. Whereas in policing, it's very often the case that that first scene attendance and those initial investigative steps is the beginning of what can be a really long and arduous journey for the victim, but also a complex journey for the officer who's investigating the case. So therefore, it's unlikely to be the case that we can always respond in the same way as a fast food delivery service might be. And just to give some context around that, in Durham, we have 372 licensed takeaways. And if each one of those had 4 delivery drivers, taken together, that would be more than the total number of police officers in Durham and Darlington. So to give that sense of the scale of activity, where we might have, we would have 400 officers or thereabouts available for response across a 24/7 period. We're obviously a service that is truly open all hours, whereas the pizza delivery services might only be open for 5 days a week for maybe 4, 5, 6 hours. So it's a very difficult comparison to make. And for all those reasons, that's why, both for the convenience of the victim, but also for the safe response to a range of incidents, that it can take a number of days for us to get to see somebody. Moving into the second part of the question, and sort of speaking around how we prioritise our response. As both Peter and I have mentioned, we use that Thrive approach in terms of assessing threat, harm and risk. And ultimately that helps us determine the grading of an incident and how we'll progress it through initial response and through into investigation. That grading approach is nationally recognised and is effectively split into 3 areas. We talk about immediate response to incidents, and that's where we're required to respond within 15 or 20 minutes, subject to whether it's an urban or rural area. The national standard is that we would respond to 82% of those incidents within the 15 or 20-minute response category. Our average for the first 5 months of this year is 85.32%, so we meet and exceed that response requirement. In relation to the priority type incident, which we say we will get to within 2 hours, we aim to reached 70% of those calls within 2 hours, and in that same period, we've reached 72.4% of incidents within that 2-hour period. So it is very much the case that we get to significant portion of those of the incidents responding to us within the timescales that we either set ourselves or which are set nationally. The third group of incidents that we respond to are those standard or scheduled response incidents. And very often we make use of diary appointments, which are done with the agreement and sort of support of the victim to ensure that we can get to see them at a time that is both appropriate and convenient for them, set around their broader commitments. One of the questions that's often come to us is that people can't get through to the police. Now, we, with the Chief's priorities and your kind support, have invested significantly in the control room over the course of the last 12 months, to the extent that we now answer over 92% of our 999 calls within 10 seconds, which is above the national standard. And then the average wait time now for a 101 call, which is for those more routine calls into the control room, the average wait is about six seconds. So we are answering a lot of our calls really quickly, and in the majority of the time responding to our incidents in a timely manner. Of course, then, as I've mentioned, that is only part of the journey for us in terms of what then we ask our colleague, our public to then subject themselves to as part of the broader investigation. Many of those investigations will last months, if not years, when we take into account the court processes Peter's already described.
Thanks, Kieran. That was really helpful and a sort of really good comparison. Sometimes what we see with the public, when they understand capacity and demand, I think there's an understanding there of how you respond and how you prioritise response. I think you've really captured both those, the twin question really well. And I think, as you've said, it's the public who've supported me as well within that resource, because it was a priority for them in relation to the IT side, but it's obviously our team has made it happen. And I know that the executive team with Rachel sort of really looking at really driving performance and understanding what the public are after and what means the most to them. And I think that's been very responsive as a force and as an executive team to have that oversight, but also the willingness to take the questions as well. So I'll move on to the next question, which is why do the police put the investigation back on me? And the example would be check your neighbour's CCTV, ring doorbell, do your own sort of local investigations. So that was the question around putting it back onto the public to do a little bit of groundwork themselves.
I'll pick this one up if I may, Commissioner. So I think it's one of these where there's always a fine balance between trying to understand the immediate needs of a victim or witness, what investigative opportunities there are, and the severity of any alleged incident having taken place. So as already described, the initial call and context of the incident will have been through that significant thrive of risk assessment and will have made our initial determination of what the response needs to be. But that said, it's never then the next step to try and put the whole investigation back onto the public. What we do, however, need to do is rely on the public to help us where possible and to ensure we are collectively doing all we can to bring offenders to justice. What we have in today's technological age is significant advancements and opportunities that come with those, which is such things as private CCTV and ring doorbell cameras. And it's really important that these are explored as soon as possible, because if we don't, there can be real loss of information and what's been recorded on them. And also we need to understand as soon as we can if there are opportunities within these in the first place that can help us identify either leads to follow up on or even suspects or offenders. So by the proximity that people have to their neighbours, they're often much better placed to know when people are at home, who to directly ask the questions of, and to do this in a really timely manner. And if we're able to do that working with people and in support of what we're all trying to achieve here in making sure we investigate these crimes as effectively as possible. This can really help the investigation, but actually there are some additional benefits of helping communities understand what's going on in their area. They can let people know what's happened and what's going on around their own home addresses, so they can be even more vigilant and aware. It is also the case that some incidents, although significantly impacted for a victim, there are limited investigative opportunities. And in the same way the initial call is assessed, the investigative opportunities has to be assessed too. And it's such discussions and requests of victims that can support this. So as we've heard already, where appropriate, the force might begin an investigation through the virtual investigation team as a telephone-based investigation. And this involves speaking with a victim on the telephone or for a video call to understand the circumstances of the report and make decisions on the next steps. This, albeit may seem not the response that people are always after, it really is a far more efficient and effective way to commence an investigation in certain circumstances, having obviously put all of the assessments into place and making sure we're right to do so. Now, this said, this is only used where the risk and severity of the allegation has been assessed appropriately and a response has not been deemed necessary in those circumstances at that particular time. And just for reassurance, we don't use this method for serious crime matters, domestic abuse, sexual offences, and other offences such as more serious property-based offences, such as house burglaries. As part of the initial investigation, it may be that there is CCTV evidence from the house or an adjoining property. We'll often ask the victim where they can to share that footage, and we can do this through use of technology and providing an email link. And again, it's just about trying to ensure that we are efficient and effective in really gathering that information and evidence at the earliest opportunity. This does prevent unnecessary journeys and real delays in that investigation process, but it allows us to concentrate on the most productive elements of the investigation as well, which, and as I've already touched on, prevent that loss of evidence. So, of course, all of that said, if a victim is unable to do this, it is an ask. But if they are unable to do this, then we will assess this further and determine whether to physically attend. But we're just trying to obviously work with victims, with the community, and prevent any unnecessary delays and the impact that might have in loss of evidence.
Thanks, John. And I think what you said there really resonates with me, being a member of my own neighbourhood social media. And if something happens, often people say, can you check your CCTV? My car's been damaged or somebody's been in my property, and it alerts everybody on that estate that something might have occurred. It also helps people be neighbourly, and I think they really want to support other people. And I think, like you say, for the type of crime where you're looking at, not the one you were saying that you don't ask that information, but it really does help the community come together. And I know we're very keen on promoting Keeping the Know, and I know through Keeping the Know you can also record that you've got the likes of CCTV or Ring doorbell that might help the police should they need it. So I think you're right, it's that relationship between the public and the police that we work together where we can to get as much evidence as we possibly can in a timely manner. And I think that's a really helpful sort of answer to the question, but also to the public, the importance that the public play in helping bring people to justice as well, so we can pursue those offenders where we possibly can if we have the evidence. Thanks, John. My next question is, I have a friend who has been a victim of antisocial behaviour, which is very similar to my situation, but she's had a positive experience and I haven't. Is this postcode policing?
Commissioner, I'll step back in and pick this one up. I think this follows on neatly from the earlier question in relation to contact management. So first thing to say is, as a force, we're really sorry for the person's friend. It haven't had a positive experience. And of course, we want everybody to have as positive experience as they can in terms of their interaction with the constabulary. So if we can gather further information outside of the meeting, then of course we'll take that particular case up as an individual matter. But on behalf of the Chief Constable, I want to reassure all of the people dialing into this is that there is absolutely no postcode lottery for policing services across the force area. The Chief has made neighbourhood policing one of the key focus areas for the force during her time with us, and really started that off from day one with some of her visits out to the neighbourhood teams and understanding the context of neighbourhood policing in the local area. She has a national role and is at the forefront of rolling out enhanced and empowered neighbourhood policing teams right the way across the country, and where better to start than Durham. She's led work that has bolstered our well-established neighbourhood policing teams, which operate across the 11 major towns in the area and Durham City itself. And if people were to go onto the force website, they would see that we've got a website that is nationally consistent, and there is a named neighbourhood officer, police officer at PCSO for every single part of the force area, and we see their photographs and contact means there. So we are in positive shape there in terms of resourcing for our neighbourhood policing teams. Of course, that there are times when a similar incident might result in a difference in response, and primarily that's going to be due to available resource and competing demand at the time that an incident is reported, and staff availability to take that incident response forward. For example, we're often busier in terms of calls in the force control room between 3 PM and midnight, and that's despite us having additional staff on duty to cater for that extra demand. Sometimes the demand is just high, and that means that our response times can be slower at certain times during the day or even on certain days of the week. Our head of neighbourhood policing, Superintendent Neil Bickford, he's also the force lead for antisocial behaviour. And one of the important things that we find in policing that the best response to antisocial behaviour is a partnership one. So Neil has a really prominent role in that whole multi-agency partnership work, leading elements of the Safer Durham Partnership and the Darlington Community Safety Partnership. In fact, Assistant Chief Constable Richie Allen, he's the chair of the Safer Durham Partnership, and Chief Superintendent Steve Long, who's the head local police in its entirety, chairs the Darlington Community Safety Partnership. So we have a really strong footprint right the way across the partnership, and we believe that that's important in terms of building trust and confidence amongst our communities, because ultimately that level of trust and confidence is right at the heart of what we do and is front and centre in the Chief Constable's delivery plan to make sure that the force is the best it possibly can be. As part of our neighbourhood policing guarantee, we're always looking for feedback on community issues. And we use the local PAC meetings, confidence surveys, and directly speak to our communities through our neighbourhood policing team, whether in person or by online approaches. So any feedback that we get where somebody hasn't had a positive experience is really important for us to take the service forward. But we do recognise, as Peter described in the main presentation, that level of communication in terms of that two-way approach is a really important area of focus for the force in terms of improving our service. Working with our partners, we always want to make sure that we can deliver the best service to victims of antisocial behaviour. However, where members of our community feel like the service hasn't been met, or there hasn't been a joined up response, and in certain circumstances they can invoke an ASB case review. And this is independently coordinated by your office, who work with victims and relevant partners in an effort to ensure that there's joined up solutions to problems. We don't get very many of those, but we do take them on board, and we do ensure that any recommendations that come out of those case reviews are taken forward in a sensitive and appropriate way. But as I say throughout, very much our intention is to give our victims of antisocial behaviour the best possible service we can. If we've fallen short in an instance, of course we apologise for that. We want to help rectify that. But hopefully the majority of people do get a positive response and experience.
Thanks, Kieran, and I would like to thank the person who submitted that question, because obviously they both reported it, and that's something that we always pushing to the public to say if it's happened, report it, because if it hasn't been reported, how do we know where it's happening, to build a pattern, trends, etc. It's really important. And as you've just alluded to, it's either ring or chat or do it online. So there's really, the information that comes in is really vital to us to get us that information. So when we do look at the hotspot patrols, or when you're looking at it as a management issue, we actually get a real true extent of the antisocial behaviour that's occurring in the area. So both those people, be the person who provided the question, but also the friend, have both done the right thing and reported that information that we can respond to. So thank you for that. My next question is, what training and awareness takes place in the force to ensure that officers do not use victim blaming language?
I'll pick this one up again, if I may, Commissioner. Yeah, this is a really, really important area for us, making sure victims understand that they are listened to, that their concerns that they're raising are absolutely being taken seriously, and we recognise the vulnerability and the individual circumstances come with victims is really, really important, and means we need to be on the front foot with. We've already heard about some of the training that's been provided through Operation Crystal and continuous professional development. I think it's fair to say, we really do recognise that how we refer to a victim is hugely important. And we've been working tirelessly in recent years to improve how our staff speak to and consider victims. There's been national reports, such as the recent one completed by Dame Louise Casey, that make clear the impact on victims if our staff are anything less than entirely professional, understanding, having the right empathy for victims. Further, we have gone through our own journey with this, and we've had our own historical criticism that came through the IPSA report, which is an independent inquiry into child sexual abuse that was published in February 22. And recognising the impact this had, and this is nowhere near how we want to be treating victims and recognised as a service. We've made significant strides to improve how we identify victims and speak about their experiences. But really, we will always fully acknowledge this is a continuing task to keep checking ourselves on. We have to keep reminding ourselves, our staff, and this being consistently reviewed through our force governance structures and with our own review and dip sampling as well. And in particular, fall straight into our vulnerability working group that has oversight of this directly, and also the training and wider implications. Through such reports and findings, it is recognised that this will often relate to our most vulnerable victims, and we've been focused on this for the last few years. We've had our own internal awareness and associated training, which has been called Through the Eyes of a Child. This focuses on understanding adverse experiences from the perspective of a child, and to prevent us from stepping into that space where we're causing adultification when we consider such incidents and investigating any associated offences. In recent times, we've literally just been through a whole training cycle where we've just trained all our operational staff in respect of domestic abuse incidents, and this is through a nationally delivered programme through the College of Policing called Domestic Abuse Matters. And this is also delivered in conjunction with subject matter experts in this field. And again, the nationally recognised domestic abuse experts known as Safe Lives. Following the successful completion of this programme, we, Durham Constabulary, have now obtained a licence, so we can deliver this ourselves through our own learning and development team. But it can only be delivered if it's supported by an external partner to ensure that we constantly have that lived experience and expertise for all of the training. And what this does mean is that every new recruit is being trained to the same standard and with the same awareness. And then we've also heard about Operation Sateria. This has seen us at the forefront of really developing and evolving our response to sexual offence allegations and the subsequent investigations, and how we support victims. And this is through the joint programme between police and the Crown Prosecution Service. And again, this is a continuing process for us, where we continue our development and ensure that we're communicating this to staff, what those expectations are, making sure they get the associated training and they understand the impact of language, and ensure that victims are seen exactly as that from the outset and throughout the investigation. And this is an area we will continue to benchmark ourselves on, work with the national teams wherever we can, and continue to develop our positive practices. And finally, we will continue working with other forces, wider bodies, and including your own office as well, to share and learn from best practice elsewhere, and really be the best we can.
Thanks, John. And like you said, there's an awful lot of work on there, and I think really value that you value the lived experience part of it as well. And what Peter mentioned, you know, the work that the force is doing, the dip sampling that's been done. Everybody's is a single point of failure with one person, one individual, and I think that's really important. And also Michael's on the call, my victims champion. I think there's that lived experience, and also there's always opportunities to learn and to inform, good and bad, because we get some really fantastic resources and thank yous from a really positive experience. So that informs the work that we're doing as well, and also the work that you've said around the importance of that, given national things that's going on as well as local, that we're actually doing as much as we possibly can to address what we've learned, lessons that we've learned from the past. Thank you for that. It's really important response. My next question is, as a victim of a recent crime, I've constantly chased the officer for updates and question why evidence I have provided has not been followed up in a timely way. I accept officers take rest days, sick leave, annual leave. What is in place to ensure that crime investigations are reallocated so that victims can receive timely communication and explanation?
Commissioner, I'll pick that one up, because that talks a little bit more about how we maintain that victim relationship as we move through an investigation. Peter's already mentioned that as part of an investigation, that any victim who reports a crime has rights. The 12 rights that are catered for in the Victims Code of Practice. Now, the Victims Code of Practice has been recently strengthened and has been made part of the Victims and Prisoners Act, which came into being last year. And the provisions of this act come into force imminently, but primarily they are an improvement of the existing codes. Now, again, if an individual victim hasn't had the service that they believe that they would have wished to have had, and they'd like to discuss that further, then of course we'd welcome the detail to be able to follow that up on an individual case. But as Peter's described, many of our victims demonstrate and will say to us that they are satisfied with the approach of Durham Constabulary in terms of how it manages its investigations. We know that we're very successful in terms of detecting crime, but we do recognise that is only a simple measure, and the sense that a victim has in terms of how well they're cared for is also hugely important to us as we take investigations through their lifetime. Locally, we manage our investigations through our own crime recording system, and that begins with the investigator completing that victim's needs assessment, as we talked about in the main presentation. This assessment helps us determine how and when a victim would like to be contacted and the frequency of any of that contact. That's based in part on any assessment of their vulnerability, but also in terms of their private lives. They may not want to be contacted by telephone on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, and they may prefer to do their engagement with us through online means. Now, we know from our systems that 100% of our victim-based crimes have victims' needs assessments recorded on them, because it's a mandatory element of the initial investigation. You can't progress the investigation without having done that. And we're only one of a very small number of forces who can actually do that and say hand on heart that we have performance at this level. We do, however, recognise that it's not just about the quantity, and we do our best to ensure quality in this area through supervisory reviews of investigations as they progress. Where an officer goes on an extended period of leave, we do make efforts to reallocate investigations. But we find that this requirement is relatively rare. One, because many of our officers are at work progressing investigations as we want them to be, and any absence can be planned. But we also believe, based on feedback from our victims, that continuity is a critical success factor in our ability both to achieve a positive outcome for the victim in terms of the investigation moving forward to either a charge or a court outcome for the offender. We're also, in terms of that relationships that the victim has with the initial responding officer or the detective who's taking the case forward. We know that we're amongst the best forces in the country at charging and bringing offenders to justice through other means. But we also know that many of our victims are satisfied with the service that they receive. We recognise that some of our victims are harder to contact, and we also recognise that officers are not always available at a date and time to suit the victim. And that is why the Chief and yourself, you made it a key priority to introduce the My Durham portal nearly 12 months ago now. We worked with an internationally recognised provider in Salesforce who are actually involved in customer care systems right the way across the international business environment, not just in policing. And they help create an electronic interface for victims, which Peter's talked a little bit about in the main presentation. As I've said, that went live just nearly a year ago now, and that allows victims to obtain updates on their case at a time that's suitable for them. They can also send and receive personal messages through the system to contact the investigator and get that information that they need. So during the first 6 months of having this system in place, we created over 6,500 new incident journeys, which is effectively the record of an incident. We received over 1,300 messages from victims, and we sent over 1,000 messages out to victims by the officer in the case or the investigator. So we do put in place measures to make it as convenient as possible for victims to be able to gather, to be able to share their views on how a case is moving forward. And what I would say is many instances where a victim has provided evidence, it's not to say it hasn't been followed up. It just might mean that we've done it in a particular way. Sometimes evidence has to be referred across to third parties, such as forensic providers who will assess evidence in a particular way. So it's not the case that we don't follow things up, but we do recognise that sometimes our communication can be better. And as we've talked a little bit about that throughout the whole session, that we are working really hard to improve that communication by providing different means for members of the public to contact us, but also different means for us to provide feedback along the way.
Thanks, Kieran. And I know Peter touched on about that communication, and I think those things that was mentioned in that particular question, as you just sort of alluded to, some of that technology is going to be a real game changer. And I have to say, you know, thank you to Rachel and yourself, Kieran, for willingly, despite there's a lot going on at the time, to bring that Durham portal in, and to pilot it in those areas initially. But I think that's going to be a real game changer because the information's there. Also for people to look at it, the amount of information that you're giving out, that resource, it is like a world leading CRM, and I think for us to be one of the few forces that had it initially, it gives us an opportunity to really be ahead of the game, to really respond to some of those things and to address that information from a victim's point of view, but also it helps us as well because all the information's in one place as well. So I think it's really important that we have that, we open, we listen. We don't always get it right, but I think the public know that they can come to me, they can come to you, and really as part of that learning experience that we can get better and we can strive for that world-class and first-class victims service as well. So thank you very much for that contribution. The next question is, I am a victim of a nasty assault. I would like to know why my perpetrator was interviewed as a voluntary attendee and not arrested.
I'll answer this one if I can, Commissioner, just in relation to the practices and policies that sit around this. So I think it's really important we understand that arresting an offender is not the only option available to us. It is actually one option of a number that is available to an investigator when they deal with the case. And we have to also understand that we are governed by our own rule book with police powers and procedures, which is the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984. And that's really clear in terms of what we can and can't do, and at what points we have to consider different steps of how we approach addressing an offender. And we need to consider that to arrest is a really big step, because essentially we're taking someone's liberty at that moment, and we have to be really clear on why and justifying that case. The decision, it will have been based on a number of factors, and that can be things about how long ago the offence took place, what the risk of the offence or likelihood of further harm coming to a victim or others maybe, or the need to gather evidence through use of other police powers and procedures that can only be secured through an arrest. So it's needs to say an arrest is not an automatic consequence of a crime being reported, and decisions to arrest are considered in each case with regards to all the circumstances, judged on their own merits, and the decision to arrest having to be proportionate, lawful, and necessary within each case being addressed in that way. Sometimes, where an investigator deems it suitable, then they can seek to speak with the suspect and arrange for them to be interviewed as an alternative to arrest. And this is where we term it voluntary attendee. And this can be at times actually the better option, because as a service and as investigators, we can arrange a suitable time and location. We can make sure solicitors and appropriate adults are present to really help the interview process go smoothly and ensure we really are achieving best evidence out of that interview process. And we can ensure that the evidence is still captured in the same way as would be achieved through an arrest of a suspect having been made, but just far more efficiently and effectively. And in many cases, this can actually help the progress of the case more quickly than an arrest would achieve, with those having been arrested ultimately having to be released either under investigation or on bail at times. So for reassurance, in all cases, the decision to arrest or not is taken on the merits of the case. And as I say, it's a really big step to have to consider, with the interests and protection of the victim at the heart of our considerations. Just because the suspect is dealt with through voluntary attendance rather than being arrested, however, this does not undermine the severity of the offence or how seriously we are actually seeking to treat it. That there is also no change in how a suspect can ultimately be prosecuted as a result of being dealt with in this way. So hopefully give some reassurance and wider understanding of why we may take this step instead of an arrest.
Thanks, John. I think it would, in relation to the member of the public that's asked that question, to really understand what it is and why, and also, like you say, it's a case by case basis. So thank you for the detail around that question. My final question is, why was the police charge dropped to a lesser one without consulting me as the victim?
Again, I'll pick this one up if I may, Commissioners. It's a procedural point and a practical point. So from the question, as I understand it, I think this relates to a case where charges have been brought against a suspect, progressed to court, and the initial charge that they were being taken to court on has been dropped to what is deemed as a lesser offence. Obviously, with this sort of detail, it's hard to, without the specifics, to really go into this particular case and comment on the exact reasons. However, if these can be provided at a later stage, I will gladly ensure we've got the right follow-up and we can really help the understanding in those circumstances. It would be anticipated a victim is consulted throughout the whole of the criminal justice process. Peace has given a really clear indication of victim rights and the victim process that we would seek to adopt and always adhere to. However, there are circumstances where this will not have been able to be achieved ahead of such decisions having been made. And this is more in the complexity of the processes and when decisions have to be made. On these occasions, the update should be provided to a victim as soon as the decision has been determined and we've got an outcome, and basically to be done as soon as possible for victim awareness and understanding. It's to say investigations vary in their complexity and the evidential opportunities, with the requirements always being to ensure a fair trial that centres around the victim. So whilst a full and thorough investigation will have been carried out, it will always be open to the suspects in the case, through their own legal advice, to present anything they feel that either undermines the investigation and that evidential threshold that's been already presented to get them through to charge into the court process, and that possibly proves their innocence, or alternatively that can mitigate the initial alleged offence, and that in turn may see this as not being as severe as first determined. All cases are judged on their own merits, and are subject to ongoing review processes that have to be carried out routinely by the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, the defence, and all those involved in the wider judicial process, which will more often than not involve a magistrate or a judge. And this is to ensure the process is fair and proportionate throughout, and the fact as all the facts are understood and fully determined. It's through this review process where decisions to alter charges can be made, and this will often fall outside of police processes, as it will move through the criminal justice partners and normally be addressed by the Crown Prosecution Service on our behalf, with this at time being actually undertaken whilst in court, and this is when discussions are really held and they play out, and these decisions are made at that specific time whilst in the actual courtroom. This, when it does happen, unfortunately, doesn't allow opportunity for us to consult with the victim prior to such determinations being made, but the outcome would have been decided on the facts of the case and the best interests of all involved. Now, whilst charges can be changed to a lesser one through new evidence, it can also be for a number of other reasons, which may be to ensure the offence is heard at the right court. So it may be actually to ensure that's heard at the magistrates rather than the Crown Court. And in the interest of trying to provide swift justice, the lesser offence is deemed more appropriate, as ultimately they would get the same outcome of sentencing at court, and it will ultimately achieve the same sanction as the original charge, but it actually will come with the benefits of having less delay, and having to bring a whole jury trial together, which obviously can come at significant delay, and also significant costs and requirements placed on all services, but most importantly on the victim, who needs to remain at the centre of all of this. So the considerations and outcome in such cases can be varied and vast, so it would be pretty much, it just wouldn't be possible to detail them all here, otherwise we could go on all day to be perfectly frank on this matter alone. But needless to say, the updates provided when this occurs should explain in full why this decision has been reached and what this means for the case, and ultimately any associated victim, with any such decisions having been carefully considered and determined on the known facts. So if further explanation for this particular case is wanted, I'll gladly follow that up with the individual concerned.
Thanks, John. I think that I'm sure that the resident that provided that will be reassured, but also that there's an offer there to come back and ask for some more information if needed. And I think what it does also sort of say in some of the questions there is the importance of like a service like VCAS to have that support, and you don't have to have it immediately. I said it might be weeks, might be months afterwards, but that help is there, and there can be an advocate, and they can explain some of the systems that's going on and help navigate victims around the process. And at the end of the point, you've got Michael, who's a victims champion, who can have an opportunity to have the victim's voice as well. So I think collectively that's really, really helpful. Quite a really interesting contribution by the public, but I think it represents a lot of the questions that often I get asked from the public as well. So I think that's really been helpful to capture the essence of what the public want to have answers to. And just before I sort of look to move on, Rachel, is there anything else you'd like to add on what's been said? I know it's something that's very important to us both, but there's been a lot said in this session, but I think it's been very valuable.
Thank you, Joy. Yes, I think what we've demonstrated and showing is how much we care about victims of crime. We know how difficult it is to contact the police. We know that sometimes the processes are lengthy and feel challenging. We're always trying to improve. We're always trying to be better. We are really pleased to receive questions and try to explain what's happening. We're very happy to hear directly from victims if it hasn't gone as they want, and we can look into the specifics of that. But overall, what I would say is I know that together, you and I have that absolute focus on that first class service to victims, and that will continue, and we will continue to improve over time.
Thanks, Rachel. And I would like to also take this opportunity to place on record my thanks to yourself and your team for their time and contribution today, VCAS staff and all of our officers and staff who work with victims, as well as our partners for the exceptional work they are doing to improve the experiences of victims of crime. And I also want to thank all those residents who have submitted the questions today. And as Peter said, continuous improvement is critical. The national survey recently undertaken by the Victims Commissioner, Baroness Newlove, reminds us that we still have a long way to go to deliver the care and support victims of crime deserve. They found that 33% of respondents nationally agreed they had waited too long for a case to come to court. 30% disagreed that they were kept well informed about the progress of their case. And 25% disagreed that victims are giving enough support during the court process. And only 19% of those nationally who replied to the questionnaire had heard of the Victims Code of Practice. As uncomfortable as the findings are, they are already driving important legislative and policy changes nationally to give victims of crime more rights and protection in the future. And I will be shortly launching a localised version of the survey to understand where we also need to do better, what we are already doing well, and what extra services we need to support victims. The survey will aim to capture much of a wider insight into the criminal justice experience for victims than we have seen previously. I will be providing more information on the survey and reporting its findings in the future. But I would just like to say here how grateful I am to all survivors, victims and witnesses of crime, past and present, who have previously shared their stories with us so we can learn vital lessons and put things right quickly. We really value what people tell us, and from it we can make a difference. As you may be aware, the victim care landscape is changing with the recent introduction of the Victims and Prisoners Act. This key piece of legislation placed a new duty on agencies to deliver the rights outlined in the Victims Code of Practice that we heard Peter outline earlier. So we now have a legal duty as well as a moral obligation to improve victim care. I think you'll all agree this is a huge leap forward. The deep-rooted issues within our justice system can only be probably rectified with a high level of oversight and governance. And this will be taken care of through the Act, as well as the new scrutiny panels and powers given to the Victims Commissioner. Personally, I've vowed in my Police, Crime and Justice Plan to implement a robust monitoring system to ensure the Victims Code sits at the heart of police and partners' decision-making locally. And as chair of our local criminal justice board, I will do everything in my power to ensure all partners are invested in delivering the effective and transformative care that victims of crime deserve. So thank you for everybody for your contribution today. That now concludes the meeting that we've talked about victims through this session.